If you tap into virtually any writing community, online or in person, you're likely to hear a laundry list of rules that every author should follow. But the truth is that writing is very much an art, not a science. And while guidelines and tips can certainly be helpful in developing your craft, many of these rules that people tout are truly meant to be broken and aren't really rules at all. For example, one rule that I heard from someone giving writing advice recently was that you can't write about surfing in a novel. This just doesn't make any sense to me. So today I want to do a roundup of insights from successfully published authors who I've interviewed over the past year, specifically answering the question, what is one writing rule that you decidedly break? I hope this gives you some inspiration and helps you understand that if a rule isn't working for you, that you can break it too. You all gave me such amazing feedback on my last video where I included interview snippets from literary agents on things they wish authors knew about the publishing industry, so this is going to follow the same format. The full interviews are all available to check out on my newsletter website, chapter-break.com. In addition to my interviews with successfully published authors and literary agents from top agencies, I'm also doing deep dive content from my background as a developmental book editor. If any of that interests you, I recommend checking out Chapter Break. And as a freebie for signing up to my newsletter, you're going to receive my story self-assessment worksheet. This is a resource I designed for my YouTube community to help you get unstuck with your work in progress and figure out what you should do on the next draft to take your book to the next level. The link to the story self-assessment worksheet and to Chapter Break are in the description below. Before we get into the amazing tips today, please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. It's such a simple, easy thing that really helps out my channel a lot, and I really appreciate it. The first writing rule that some successful authors break is to use popular tropes. Here's some insight from Emily March, who is a New York Times, USA Today, and Publishers Weekly bestselling author. I've written genre fiction for most of my career. Scandalously, I ignore tropes. I write the story I want to write. I've managed to be successful without fretting over how many currently popular tropes I've hit in Chapter 1. That's not to say that tropes aren't there, but they enter the story organically, not because I feel the need to feed the metadata. Authors are constantly curious about what tropes are trending in a given month or year in the publishing world, and are concerned that if they don't capitalize on these tropes that are trending, then their book is going to fall flat and no one is going to read it. But Emily's advice shows that you don't have to even think about tropes to be a successful author. If a certain trope resonates with you, then absolutely leverage it and put your own spin on it in your story. But if it really doesn't help you to conceptualize your story in terms of what tropes it includes, then forget about them entirely. The next writing rule that many successful authors break is to write every day. Here's some insight from author Lynn Liao Butler. I am not a fan of the write every day rule. I don't write every day, and I don't believe people should force themselves to write every day if they don't have an idea or are stuck on a point. For this reason, I almost never get writer's block. If I sit down and nothing is coming out, I will stop and go do something else. I wholeheartedly agree with Lynn's point that you shouldn't write every day if this does not work for you. It's one of the most common pieces of writing advice that people give out freely that simply does not work for everyone. Every author's practice and habits look different, and there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You should never feel any shame in taking a break from writing, or not writing on a day that you're supposed to if you simply cannot get the words down. The next writing rule that some successful authors break is to not revise as you write. This comes from Bianca Murray, a best-selling author and the co-host of the Shh No One Tells You About Writing podcast, which I highly recommend if you haven't checked out already, and they also have a great newsletter. Many writers recommend that you get the first draft down, however messy, before you go back to edit it. But if the foundations don't feel solid, I can't keep building on them. And so I'll often go back and revise my opening chapters over and over again without making much progress after that, until I'm finally happy with them. I work with authors who fall into both camps. Those who just get down a messy first draft, no matter how messy it is, and then revise and find the story from there, and authors who work to polish up their story as they go and do some revision work in the drafting process. Again, one method is not better than another, and you can have a great finished draft either way. It's all about what works for you and what helps you stay on track as you draft. The next writing rule that some successful authors break is to adhere to genre expectations. Here's some insight from author and blogger Kern Carter, who also has a great newsletter called Writers Are Superstars. I don't conform to the structure of my genre. What I mean is that by label, I am a YA author. The main characters in my novels are teenagers, which is the general prerequisite for YA. But just because my characters are young doesn't mean I compromise depth or heavy themes. I have found a way to create these heavily layered stories through a plot-driven surface. So if, like Kern, your novel doesn't fit all of the standard expectations of your given genre, that's okay. It means you're bringing something new, fresh, and innovative to the table, which is a good thing. And we're seeing more and more authors experiment with blending and bending genres. And to great success, for instance, the rise of literary thrillers and the term romantasy. If you're writing romance, for example, it doesn't mean that there necessarily has to be a happy ending. Or if you're writing literary fiction, that doesn't necessarily mean that your story has to be much more character-driven than plot-driven. Genre expectations can be helpful until they're not. If your book isn't meeting the genre expectations, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it or that it's not valid. In fact, it might be even more captivating because of that. The next writing rule that some successful authors break is to write chronologically. Here's some insight from author and illustrator Victoria Ying. I start writing from the climax and write forward to the beginning. This usually helps me because I know where the character has to turn and change. I know where the main thrust of the story is heading. I think Victoria's approach is really interesting, and I totally see how it can help you maintain continuity in your narrative, because you know what the plot is ultimately building up to. Sometimes when you're writing completely chronologically from beginning to end, even if you know what the climax is, sometimes you can get lost along the way and the plot can kind of fall apart or take unexpected turns, right? This approach really prioritizes the main dramatic moment of the story and make sure that the rest of the narrative is all supporting that. The next writing rule that some successful authors break is to explain unfamiliar words and concepts. Here's what author Mansi Shah had to say. There's been a long-standing trend in publishing that authors writing about non-white experiences are expected to make those cultural differences easy for the reader and italicize and explain any words or concepts that aren't part of mainstream American culture. I want readers like myself who have sparse representation to be able to turn to my books and feel like they are coming home. So I never break from my characters' POVs to explain anything to the reader that the characters would already know. Here, Mansi talks about prioritizing the authenticity of her characters' experiences. And she makes sure that those are reflected on the page, even if that means some readers are going to be unfamiliar with certain words or concepts being presented in the story. Remember that readers will have Google easily at their fingertips to figure things out in the story that you don't necessarily spoon feed to them. So if it feels more natural and organic to you, and again, authentic to the character's experiences, to leave certain elements unexplained on the page, then go ahead and let them be. The final writing rule that some successful authors break is follow all grammar rules to a T. Here's some insight from author Farah Penn, who has a great newsletter and also a TikTok that I recommend checking out. Sometimes breaking certain rules works better for your character's voice, because we as humans don't always converse in prim and proper English. Reading my work out loud when I'm at the polishing stage helps me determine what sounds the best in regards to what I'm trying to express. I could go on and on about certain grammatical rules that maybe don't sound natural to a contemporary reader, and that don't necessarily apply as well to contemporary stories, especially in dialogue. The book Dreyer's English is a really great resource for grammar in general, but it specifically talks about how some grammar rules are kind of stuffy and outdated, and how language should be something that evolves naturally. And we should be allowed to show the way that people naturally talk on the page, even if it's not grammatically correct. For instance, I know I've made a ton of grammatical errors just in narrating this video. That's not to say that you should deliberately write grammatically incorrectly unless you are doing so for a specific reason. But don't fear that the grammar police are coming to arrest you if you make some grammatical errors here and there. Farah's point about reading aloud is a really excellent tip, and many authors use this strategy to make sure that their characters' voices sound authentic and that their prose in general is flowing very organically. I hope this video helped you understand that writing rules are meant to be broken, and pretty much all successfully published authors out there have broken one writing rule in one way or another. Let me know in the comments which of these writing rules you choose to break. I have another video that goes into my personal favorite writing rules to break, so check that out if you're interested in some more of these. Before you head out, don't forget to check out my newsletter, Chapter Break, and grab your free story self-assessment worksheet. The links are in the description below. Please go ahead and hit that thumbs up button, especially if you are enjoying these snippets from my interviews. I can certainly put together more of these insights for you. And if you haven't yet joined our amazing community, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I promise you won't regret it. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing.